slow traveling through different cultures and experiencing the culture of the trail, the culture of the people and the towns. And it's just a different way of traveling that I think ultimately can be a lot more fulfilling than just ticking destinations off your bucket list.
You were just listening to the voice of today's guest, my friend and travel podcast host, Jason Moore, and we'll be learning just a bit more about him throughout today's show. And now you're listening to the voice of today's host, that's me, Josh Bennett, recorded live here from Oslo, Norway, right here on the Transnatural Perspective podcast. Welcome back, everybody. This is the show where we put nature in focus, bringing you global perspectives on society and culture across environments and landscapes to inspire you to integrate sustainable practice into your life, your job, your teaching, or whatever practice you may participate in. As I've said many times on the show, when it comes to sociocultural and ecological sustainability, we must begin to attack these existential issues from all sides. No matter what you do, there is a way you can start today. Don't forget to stay up to date with all our episodes and everything in between by subscribing to this podcast wherever you're listening. And even better, you can follow or contact the show, which is basically me, on all the social media with the handle @TransnaturalPod, all one word. Check out the show's growing archive of articles on Medium, or you can just send us a good old-fashioned email at transnaturalpod@gmail.com. And yes, of course, please don't forget to share this wherever and with whomever you can. It's really the best way you can support the show at this time. So thanks, everybody. And now on to today's show. In the modern English vernacular, the Cambridge English Dictionary says, travel is to make a journey, usually over a long distance. But if you go back even further, into the Middle Ages, we come to find out that world travel originates from the French word travail, meaning work, labor, toil, suffering, or painful effort, trouble, or an arduous journey. Well, that doesn't sound like much fun, does it? Or at least not the kind of image you may see today on today's travel magazine. Okay, enough with the good old fake British accent trying to be French accent. What we're trying to say here is the origins of travel, or at least the word travel, is not what you might expect to see on today's travel magazine at the supermarket, or, hanging out on a glorious beach somewhere, or going to faraway places and all that jazz. Although some of us perhaps who are into human-powered travel can identify a bit with the self-inflicted pain and torture part, perhaps. And that brings us to our guest, who's here today to discuss travel with us. Jason Moore is the host of the Zero to Travel podcast, one of the longest running and most widely listened to travel podcasts available. Jason is also the co-founder of Location Indie, a community that helps people combine their love of travel and entrepreneurship into sustainable ways of life that are not dependent on being in one single location. I was really happy to bring Jason on for many reasons, including the fact that he is well-versed and nuanced in many perspectives on travel, having interviewed over nearly 400 travelers over the past 7 years of his podcast run. As well, Jason is a fellow USA American living here in Oslo, Norway. He's a neighbor and he's a real good friend. So we have lots to talk about and lots to share in today's show. It's a really unique show too, because it's actually our first in-person interview, as well as it happens to be the 7th anniversary of Jason's podcast, the Zero to Travel podcast. And if you like what you hear today on the Transnatural Perspective podcast show, you can always go and check out the show we did together on his podcast, which is also being released this week. I think it's out right now. I hope this is the first of many conversations with Jason on the show, and I hope that you enjoy. So let's get on with the show, everybody, and please stick around after the conversation, as there will be some extended reflections on what we talked about today. All right, everybody, enjoy. Wondering what the show is about, and that's what it's about.
There you go.
Yeah, there we go. So today, everybody, I am very excited and I'm very happy to have on my good old friend here in Norway. We're recording live. I've got Mr. Jason Moore, host of the Zero to Travel podcast, on this podcast. And
Finally. Yes.
After all these episodes. Yeah, no, but so I think you'll probably be around episode 9 or 10. The special thing about this episode is this is the first episode that we are actually doing live and in person.
Yes, and we are socially distanced, by the way.
Yeah.
Just so everybody knows. But I mean, recording in person is the best. I'm getting tired of the old Zoom, Skype calls, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny because what's funny about this podcast is that this podcast is actually about being outside,
right?
Crossing cultures, experientially learning from people and places around the world and all that kind of stuff. But this podcast started kind of as a result of the pandemic. And
right. The irony is
having a little extra time on my hands. And for that reason, this is what kind of was, it was a kernel, it was a twinkle in my eye for a long time. And very much to, you helped motivate me because you have your own wonderful podcast. And it all just came together in the past 6 months or so. So here we are, first live and in person, and I can already feel that it's quite nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love how you've been able to sort of combine all of your passions and the things that mean something to you into this show, into one sort of thing. You've really I don't know.
Transcending all of the corners of my
No, it's cool. I mean, this is what you've studied academically and, I mean, it's just really cool the way you've kind of created this format. So I really appreciate that you're putting this stuff out there because it's important, right? I mean,
yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, and it's always
in the digital age, we need to remember the values of nature and culture, and also how nature and culture is interpreted and dealt with across cultures and across. It's funny because you were asking me before the show, okay, what exactly does this transnatural mean? And sometimes we explain it in different ways on the show a lot. But, and for all of you listening out there, especially maybe if you're just joining us for the first time, this idea of transnaturalism came from kind of the idea of transculturalism. But transculturalism, it's like, transcending, going across cultures. Yeah.
So what is something that goes across cultures? For an example would be, very simple example, I always like to bring it back to food, Yeah. For example, if you live in the south of Germany, or if you live in parts of Switzerland or parts of Italy, where all these kind of countries border together, a very transcultural food staple there would be like the potato.
Right.
Of course, Italy we associate more with pasta and raviolis and all this kind of stuff. In Switzerland, we're thinking about raclette and all this stuff. And then in Germany, we think about, I don't know, the Bratwurst and the schnitzels and stuff like that. But all these places, the transcultural thing that kind of connects them is the potato. Right. But what is the potato really? This is what we're here on this podcast to talk about. What is the potato?
Wow.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a part of nature,
That's great. It sounds simple, but it's deep. It's multi-layered, right? Like nature doesn't have boundaries and borders, right? I mean, we're looking at a made-up structure of countries and borders, and it's really one ecosystem when it comes down to it in many ways. But I love the potato example because that is a great example of something that's one thing that's consistent, but used in so many different ways, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a very simple example to kind of explain the idea of something that is very cultural to us, but also is transnatural. It goes across different natural areas, across different environments and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So this is where we're going. And of course, it's an evolving term, and we're constantly redefining it and stuff like that. But it's like transculturalism. It's like culture, but it's kind of anthropocentric. Is that a word? I don't know.
Sure, it is now.
It's taking it out of it's detracting a bit from the human element and kind of reminding us that a lot of our culture comes from nature.
Yeah.
And as we know, we both live here in Norway.
Yes, very much true here, right?
Yeah. And one of the famous sayings here in Norway from the great climber Arne Næss, who was also kind of considered one of the founders of ecosophy or eco-philosophy or deep ecology, which kind of started right here in Norway, is this idea that nature is the home of culture. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's something that can be easy to forget, right? Like how the environment impacts a culture. I mean, I think when we travel and we land in a new country, say, I mean, we're looking at we're immediately immersed in a different culture. I mean, and you can see the obvious things right in front of you, like the food or maybe the smells, the things they have in the market, the way people behave, but you're not necessarily thinking about the land and how that ties in and maybe informs the culture as well. Like in some places you might be, you go trekking in Nepal in the Himalayas, and it's like, well, that's very much part of the cultural experience there, right? It's not, you can't just be like, oh, well, here's the culture and then here are the Himalayan mountains and they're separate thing. And it's not, it's a way of life, right?
Yeah.
And I think in some cities or some places, you can kind of lose track of that, right? Because just like in a city, you might be surrounded by, buildings or concrete or playgrounds and these sort of things like the potato. They're a consistent thing in different places.
Yeah.
But you got to remember as a culture, that place, that environment matters. It does impact the way either people behave, the food, like you said, so many different things. So it is a fascinating, deep topic, I think.
Yeah, but it's something that, and actually this is why I thought it'd be interesting to have you on the podcast, because for those of you who are not familiar with Jason's work, we're going to talk about it a little bit. Jason is the host of the Zero to Travel podcast, which is a very awesome travel podcast.
Thank you.
Which I think, and we're going to break it up because I don't know, when I listen to your podcast, I'm a big fan of your podcast. I love listening, not just saying that because you're my
Thank
friend.
you, sir.
But I'm a fan. And
you're not just saying that because I gave you coffee and Snickers pie today.
It was delicious, and some ginger snaps.
Well, we just recorded a podcast with you and I, so if you want to hear Josh rock the mic over there, you can check it out. It was our top 10 challenges of living abroad, and we've done a couple different shows around that.
Yeah,
so.
which I think it was a really good podcast too, because we also discussed a lot of topics that are very transcultural minded and very transnatural minded.
Yeah,
talking a lot about, especially what it's like to live abroad.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, and that kind of experience. And I think that's what's cool about your podcast, because your podcast really, to me as a listener, it not only helps people kind of from their homes, wherever they may be, or their headphones, wherever they're listening, they get to hear about what it might be like to go live in different places, or even more, I think you focus a lot on how people were able to go from where they are, kind of zero, to travel, like getting outside of their comfort zones or going exploring different places, different cultures, and different like natural landscapes. This is, it's an amazing podcast. Everybody should check it out. You can, if you want, start with the episode we just recorded, which will be out about now, should be out now. And so I think that this is a really great value of the work that you're doing. So can you just tell us, just to give us like a little synopsis before we get into how you came up with this idea for this podcast and whatnot, like what is, in your own words, what would your podcast be about?
Yeah, it's just helping people travel the world on their terms, no matter what their situation or experience. So, but through that, I mean, I love the title of your podcast actually, because you use the word perspectives, and that's really the intention behind a lot of the show, is to just bring on different guests as an interview show. Primarily, I do some other segments and some soapbox rants occasionally on various topics. But, I think it's about a lot more than travel, right? Like ultimately, travel is about a lot more than travel, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not just seeing the destination. Of course, it's experiencing the culture and everything like that. But it's also, we always go on like our own sort of internal journey when we travel. And it can't help but change your perspectives, right? And like I just love getting to hear other people's perspectives and getting to share them, and letting people take from that what they can. I think like you never know, people listen at different times, whatever's going on in their life, and might hit your ears in a different way. And I know that's true for me. Like I might be reading a book 1 year, and then the next year I reread the book and I take something completely different out of it from a different chapter. So it's just this idea of sharing perspectives. And I think like that is really something that, I don't know, keeps your mind open. And I guess ultimately maybe makes you more free thinking in some ways, maybe makes the world a better place. Maybe that's too idealistic, but yeah, the intention behind the show originally was I had traveled for many years and lived nomadically and things like that. Just like did work that were travel jobs. I'd like managed events and was a tour manager for a band for a while and all these types of things. Wow. And then in between would just travel overseas and everything like that. And I had a lot of conversations, countless conversations with other travelers, as I'm sure you have as well, in hostels or campsites or wherever. And this was like a lot of this pre-internet type of stuff, right? Like, or very early on, going into the early internet days. So you didn't really have a lot of information about people that were out there just traveling for years. You know, I didn't even know that was a thing. And then I would just meet, you know, I was on my first trip for a couple months. It was a solo backpacking trip. I didn't know anybody that ever did anything like that. I was from the suburbs of Philadelphia. I didn't know anybody that did that. And I started meeting, you know, these Australians or wherever, where travel's in their culture. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm traveling, you know, for a year. And I'm like, what? Like, how you even, or like people that were traveling for multiple years, and they were like, you know, yeah, you can volunteer on farms. Or like, I met one guy in a hostel in France, and he's like, yeah, I'm going down to the dock today to try to find a job painting so I can save some money to like travel to the next place. It's just like these ideas never really even, I didn't even think of them. I was like, wait a minute, you can just travel? Like, that can just be a thing that you do, and you don't have to just go home after 2 weeks. Yeah, right. You know, this is like a whole way of life, man. So I just remember just being so inspired for so many years by those conversations every time. It never got old. Like, I never got tired of the, oh, where are you from? Where are you going? How are you getting around? What are you doing? It's just talking to other travelers and learning about how they were able to create a life of travel, essentially, or carve out a way of an unconventional life where they could travel many years, live abroad, have all these experiences. And it just blew my mind apart. And then when I got the sort of more experience doing it, then I just realized, well, you know, people got to know about this stuff. Like, these conversations I'm having, more people should know this. And that was the genesis of the podcast. So you got to be careful when you give a podcaster the floor, because I think I just hogged up about
I'm just like,
you know, half your show.
Keep going.
So, but I think the takeaway too is just, that sharing of perspectives, which is what you're doing here, is it's always a really important thing.
Yeah, no, and I think that I mean, that's what you're doing on your podcast. I think the kernel central thing that kind of connects everything on your podcast is this travel aspect, and then it expands out into like different types of topics. Like, you can go in all kinds of directions, and you know, bringing it into why I think it kind of intersects with what we're talking about here is because travel is, especially nowadays, the impetus for journeying, the impetus for seeing different cultures, experiencing different cultures, if you're short term or for a long term. Because I know on your show you talk to people from all around the world and all different kinds of situations. People that just want to get out for a few months, or people that want to go like live a life on the road. And I know that's like a whole other portion of what you're up to.
You know a little something about that, right? Nomad life.
I did everything but like write the book on it and figure out actually how it works, but somehow just living in the experience, you know. Yeah. But I mean, so, you know, but we got a lot of specific, you know, things that I'm thinking about now. I know that's not something that people usually hear on this podcast, that I have specific things that I'm thinking about, because usually we're just rambling all over the place. But, you know, we could talk about every aspect of your podcast. But one thing I'm particularly interested in is like, you know, the nature, you know, the nature of traveling, or say how traveling interacts with the nature, and perhaps, or maybe how it doesn't. You know what I mean? Yeah. So not to get into like a top 10 list right now. That might be a different episode right now. But, you know, even before now, not, you know, if anybody wants to know here, if you're listening in the future right now, we're kind of like in pandemic times. Somebody might be listening to this podcast. I hope somebody's listening to this podcast in 10 years.
They're like, oh yeah, remember those times? That was crazy.
But even before this, you know, there's a lot of things happening or in the world that is very, very existential. Yeah. This word existential at this point in time. And for many, travel might seem something like kind of more off to the side now. For some people, even with, you know, just like all the concerns, climate change and sustainability, I feel like, you know, people's priorities are changing a lot. Also in terms of like financial things, maybe, you know, the economies aren't doing still well, but people still want to get out there and travel. They still want to experience new cultures, all this kind of thing. Yeah. So have you seen any change, or have you spoken with anybody on your podcast or in your world of travel? Have you seen any trends happening, or things changing, or the way that people are traveling?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is certainly, my conscious has been sort of, I've become more conscious of the impact of my travels as the years have gone on. Not that I wasn't before, but I think that's a good general trend coming out of the pandemic, right? It's like, you know, remember when the pandemic first hit and we were a couple months in, and there started being these articles like the dolphins are back in the canals in Venice, or like, so such and such city can see the mountains again for the first time from their city in like 100 years, or like, someplace in India was like all the smog was gone for the first time forever. And it's just like, well, these are good things about this, like we need to kind of dial this back. And I mean, one way we can do that is, I would never say, oh, everybody should just stop traveling, because it's hard. I feel like the good that comes out of travel in terms of like perspectives and impact and like the ability of travel to kind of create global citizens, maybe more awareness. I like to think that generally speaking, the good of that outweighs some of the environmental impact. That's not to say that you should just say, all right, well, the good of this is going to outweigh, so I shouldn't even worry about my environmental impact, right? But one thing that I've been drawn to in my later years of traveling, after starting the show and talking with more people and like getting inspired by people like you that just biked down most of Norway, is this idea of human-powered travel. And I've always been interested in hiking the Appalachian Trail, for example. I think some people that aren't sort of aware of what that means might just see it on the surface as like a really long hike through many states. And you're just like, that's for people that are like really into nature and hiking. But there's a whole culture around the trail, right? There's subcultures in each state. There's different things to see. And you're doing it all by foot. I haven't gotten the pleasure of doing that. It's something that's on my bucket list. I've hiked like little parts just for fun for the day. But a travel experience like that, like I think people are changing in their minds what a travel experience means. What is the definition of a travel experience? Some people go right to I get on a plane and then I fly somewhere. And then I go to a hotel, and like involved. That is a travel experience, but it's not the only one that you can have. And I mean, I've always been incorporating nature into my travels. It was like one of the driving forces of a lot of my trips, right? Like I wanted to go to Patagonia, for example, for almost 4 months, because we wanted to be in the nature there. That was like, and then it was the culture and everything else too. It was all of that together, like what you talk about, sort of that organic mix of like, especially in a place like Patagonia, like the land sort of can define how the people, it's like a symbiotic relationship, right? So like this idea, let's go back to the AT, of just slowly kind of methodically walking through nature, appreciating that aspect, but then also slow traveling through different cultures and experiencing the culture of the trail, the culture of the people in the towns. And it's just a different way of traveling that I think ultimately can be a lot more fulfilling than just ticking destinations off your bucket list. Yeah,
slow traveling. This is something that I've always been a huge fan of. I don't know exactly why. Perhaps it has something to do, maybe not to get too deep into my psychology, but
get deep into your psychology, please. Please.
Yeah, I mean, when I think back to growing up where oh, by the way, I don't know if I'll probably mention this in the introduction, but we're both from United States.
Yes.
And I'm from Florida. Everybody on listens to this show knows I'm from Florida. And, growing up really in one of the tourism capitals of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, there's almost no bigger place than Florida. Maybe like Hawaii and Paris or something like that. But I always kind of felt that there was a bit of, even growing up at a young age, felt that there was something a bit lacking from these experiences, the kind of what we would call, I would say, McDonaldized experiences. You know what I mean? Like, not to say anything against like the package deals and stuff like that, but
mass tourism,
yeah, and how it's just been kind of wrapped up in this bubble wrap, and so I've always felt that need, that just like drive to kind of take it slow and meet people and like stop at that little cafe and just actually be on a trip rather than go on a trip or do things. You know what I mean? I think you've probably heard this a lot. A lot of people actually like to use that term in travel. I'm going to do this. Oh, we're going to go do India this year. Next year, I'm going to go do the Grand Canyon. I'm going to do. And I'm just like, yeah, but are you being? And I think that's a lot of...
I had never thought of it that way, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's cool.
There's a lot of when you're traveling a lot slower, and then you start to wonder, what does travel even mean? Now, I'm not going to go into it because I forget. Actually, the real definition of travel is very interesting. It has a lot more to learn, like going through a process, kind of like traversing, going through an ordeal of some sorts. And what is going on a journey? I mean, a journey can be all types of things. A journey can be not just a vacation. You can go on a journey on a vacation, but a journey can also be like, I was, on a sailboat sailing across the Pacific to go, meet some people on the other end, or go research some, people I've never seen before, or find some treasure that I've never found. So, right. I mean, travel, traversing, journeying, like this recreation and the kind of ability to kind of recreate things that kind of our bodies were designed to do. This kind of movement, this bipedal movement of like moving across landscapes and stuff like that, is in many ways, I think, part of what we're trying to express when we go on these like shorter trips, or something like that. And we get that kind of like serotonin, like happy juice, happy times, dopamine rush from doing, these more consolidated experiences, because the way that society is designed today, a lot of people just don't have time. So that's what's really interesting about this kind of like more like slow travel trend, maybe that's happening at least in like the Western world and stuff, is that people are actually, I'd say, maybe being a bit more conscious nowadays because of the environment, but also their own like personal well-being and stuff like that, to like, take things slower. This is pretty nice. I like it. I think we talked about this on your podcast, but I went on with my partner. We went on almost a month-long trip down the coast of Norway, and this was just like amazing. You can, I mean, to watch the landscape unfold in front of you. You know what I mean?
Well, what did you, as the landscape was changing, did you make any connections with how that landscape affected or interacted with the people of a particular place? Did it?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, actually, and this is good. Interview me.
Am I allowed to ask questions?
Absolutely. I'm much more. I don't like the interview. I like the conversation.
Yes.
So no, it's a really good question, and I wrote a lot of notes about that. Actually,
really?
When I was on this trip, because I was along the road. There was all these like different layers of experience that I started to notice. It was me or we on the bikes. There was the road, like the pavement. There was the people and the cars. And then there was a lot of farm animals, like the animals on the side of the road, the cows, the chickens, the birds and stuff like that. Because we were just in Norway, you're just passing through, all the time. Yeah. And over time, what was incredible is I, as a bicyclist, would identify more with the trees and the cows and the chickens and stuff like that than I would with the people in the cars, because we were moving much slower. These other the non-human animals, they're just pretty much static.
They're right there.
They're just there.
Yeah, you can hear them, you can smell them as you're going by, but the car's just like a big a metal box driving by quick.
Exactly, and even more so. I mean, I would feel more. It sounds kind of funny, but I would feel more of an identification with the things on the side of the road, the plants and the flora and the fauna, than I would with the people in the cars, even though I myself am a person. Yeah. But I'm not in a car. And it was very interesting to just feel that difference between being on a bicycle and, because, I mean, let's be real. If anybody out there is listening, you probably experienced riding a bicycle on the road. You're not very much, in many cases, respected by the traffic, and they're driving really fast and they're blowing their smoke in your face and all this kind of stuff. And the animals and the trees and everything are just kind of like sitting there, and you say hi to the cows and you wave to the fox and everything like that. So it was like this really...
The fox isn't going to give you the finger.
Exactly. Yeah. But what's this really... beautiful, it sounds really wild, but it was just really like beautiful kind of experience of kind of feeling more of an identification with the less industrial things.
Well, I mean, isn't that kind of the point, right? Like if you go on a trip like that, part of it might be the intention of reconnecting with nature. Is that part of that reconnection?
You know what? I mean, I guess so. I mean, it's kind of funny because especially on this show, we talk all about nature connectedness all the time. And I didn't put those words to it, but yeah, that would be pretty much what was happening. I mean, it wasn't an intentional thing. And it also, you know, people could argue and say, well, yeah, but you're still on a road and you're still on a bike. You're not like, you know, swimming in the cow.
But that's a mindset, right? Again, it's like trying to put a label on what is travel or what's this or what's that. It's like, it should be allowed. Like if you're, you know, if you're at a city park, why can't you be reconnecting with nature there? Do you have to be in the middle of nowhere? Like, isn't this part of the mindset of being present with nature, in whatever setting? It could be a tree in New York City in the middle of the busiest street. Sometimes have you ever just noticed a tree and be like, wow, this tree is just here in the middle of New York City. This is really cool, you know? Like,
yeah. And also, I mean, there's a lot of other ways you can see it too, with the trees, but then also and then this is kind of I would say a kind of a very transnatural phenomenon is when you also look at things like landscape architecture and you can see, okay, there's this, you know, if anybody's ever been to Oslo before, I know you've been there, you've been to this building, we have the Opera House. Yeah. The Oslo Opera House. Sorry, Australia, but the Oslo Opera House is giving Sydney Opera House a run for its money because the Oslo Opera House is designed to look kind of like an iceberg. Yeah. You know? And the way that one of the most stunning pieces of architecture I've seen because it interacts with the natural landscape. I mean, it goes into the water. You can swim right off of the Opera House into the water, depending on how clean the water is that week. But it's clean sometimes. But so it kind of interacts with the landscape, but at the same time, it also reflects it in a couple of ways. The Oslo Opera House is designed to look like an iceberg, relating to the Norwegian landscape, icebergs, glaciers, all this kind of stuff. But it's also in some ways a melting iceberg, kind of like talking to the future, you know? So it's this weird, bizarre like thing that is like interacting with the natural world and also reflecting the past, the present, and the future. Yeah. Pretty wild. Yeah. and you can go visit that right now, you know? And I guess maybe that's another interesting thing to wrap on just for a minute is, you know, nowadays, I guess especially you talk to a lot of people who are, you know, very focused on traveling. And have you yourself nowadays, since we're not traveling so much, especially during COVID times, but I don't want to just bring up COVID times because I think it's something to take with us into the future too. During these times where we need to think about just more sustainable ways about living life, and travel and experiencing cultures as one of those things. Yeah. So have you had any recent experiences you'd like to share of just kind of sustainable like little adventures just around town because we can't go anywhere right now? And this is kind of like this might be the new travel, or at least for right now. Yeah. You know, these adventures around the corner. Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to a lot of this comes down to the mindset, right? Like, I think we've all done it where we've been a tourist in our town and like a certain day, maybe it just feels like you're on more of a sort of a travel adventure than you're just in your town, whether you're just going to a new cafe or something. It's just, maybe you go to a new neighborhood and it just feels, you get that travel feeling, you know what I mean? And a lot of that comes down to just how you're thinking about approaching the day, right? I mean, one of the things I've learned from doing the podcast is when it comes to travel, like it's not necessarily the amount of miles you go, right? It's like it's the mindset and it's the sort of the framework, right? Like I've seen a lot of people set themselves up for a certain travel experience, but part of that is like creating a box where that can occur, right? So for you, it was like, all right, well, this is the box is I'm going to take my bike up to Bordeaux, or was it Bordeaux? Bordeaux, whatever. Yeah. I don't know. And bike down, and everything else that happens in between that, connect with nature. Maybe you'll have some amazing waffles somewhere. You might camp somewhere. Maybe you'll get rained on. You don't really know, right? Yeah. But you've kind of created like this box, and you're like, all right, now I'm going to go on this adventure, and you can do that in your daily life, right? Yeah. I mean, you could be like, hey, I'm going to go check out this new part of town. I think a lot of people, I'm getting feedback, and I've done this as well. It's just like, you don't really have much of a choice right now, but to be a tourist in your own town. So in order to do that, you kind of have to
broaden your mind, open up the ideas of what travel means or what it means to be a tourist in your own town, and just create like a framework for that and go have an experience. I think it's just being the openness of just having an experience. And, I had a guest on my show. He's been on a couple times. This guy, Alistair Humphreys, he's this known adventurer. He's been on some big, sort of adventures like I think North Pole and some things like that, but he also has been really great at just kind of he pioneering this concept of like micro adventures, he calls them, which is just like adventures out your back door.
Yeah.
Right. We have the forest right in front of where we live. So just walking in there and camping out for a night, even if I'm 100 meters from my place, that could be like a micro adventure. Right. So you can have these micro adventures. And one thing that he did, which was really cool. And I read this book, you can listen to the interview if you want. He wrote this book called My Midsummer Morning, Rediscovering How to Live Adventurously.
Sounds lovely.
So he was inspired by an author that I believe the author's book was called My Midsummer Morning. I can't remember the book, but it was written a long time ago. And this guy walked through Spain and played music and earned money, and that's how he traveled. And so this guy Alistair decided, well, all right, I'm gonna like recreate this like walk through Spain, and I'm gonna like play the violin, even though I don't know how to play the violin, and I'm only gonna live off the money that I get playing the violin, even though he didn't play the violin. So he took a few lessons like before he went.
Wow.
He was total crap at it. But this was like a challenge on many levels for his mind, right? It wasn't though so much like there was the physical aspect of the walking, but there was the travel, and it seems like the hardest part was just getting on the street and busking when you've never done that before.
Yeah.
And you don't really play the instrument and just having to earn the money and like figure out how to eat and like all this. This was the box he created.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah, that's
so,
a big experience.
If you think about that, and of course that's all nature based too, because you're walking in nature in between the towns and you're really connected. And it's just another example of slow travel, but like you don't have to do something crazy like that. Whether you think that's crazy or not, that's subjective. To have your own version of that anywhere, right? So I think that's where the power lies within the individual to go have an adventure anywhere, to reconnect with nature anywhere, anytime, just by giving yourself the opportunity and the space to do it, physical and mental space.
Yeah, totally. I mean, because it's always important to keep in mind too. I think sometimes when we talk about adventure, when we talk about outdoor adventures or indoor adventures, traveling, going on trips, going on journeys, especially with a lot of the, the advertising and the media and the marketing surrounding a lot of it, it is centered around, they spend money to make money. You know what I mean?
Right.
And we have to always keep in mind that, that doesn't actually apply to the majority of the world's population. So it's a bit unfortunate if we, like you said, it's all about the mindset, Yeah. So it's a bit unfortunate if we preserve a certain mindset only for a certain section of people. So if we can kind of explore this mindset, and I think a lot of people do try to do this through outdoor education, experiential education, certain programs that focus on this idea of adventure around the corner, then it becomes more, the adventure, journeying, these types of things become more accessible to more people. But it is also, it's about shifting the mindset, but it's also about kind of shifting the overall perspective and perceptions and that we have on what travel and adventure mean. It doesn't have to be this big high adventure stuff. It can be very much just see what's happening with that tree in the New York City park. Hey everybody, this is your host Josh, just taking a quick break right here. I wanted to say thank you so much for tuning in, and I'd love to be able to share these conversations with you week after week. It's a lot of work, but I think it's worth it to get these ideas out there. So I'd love to hear your feedback on the show. Please send us an email or write a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe and share this show wherever you can. Let's expand, let's grow. Now, enjoy the rest of the show. I don't know. Do you remember when you were a kid? I don't know, because we're both from the United States. Did you have that magazine called My Big Backyard?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me about Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Oh, we can talk about that.
No, I did not have My Big Backyard.
But you had Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Oh, yeah.
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 Do you remember any favorite ones? Or?
I just remember loving that you could choose your own adventure.
Yeah,
and,
me too.
You know, why do we sometimes forget that in life?
Right. Exactly. I mean, I don't know. I love the choose your own adventure books. I can't say that I remember any specific ones, although I do remember that Goosebumps. Remember Goosebumps?
Yeah.
Was that
that was a little bit after my
was
time.
That really?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. But I know what it is.
Anyways, but the whole idea of choose your own adventure was amazing. The thing I loved about the choose your own adventure books, which is maybe a little different than real life, is that you could always go back and then you could choose the other choice.
Right.
That's
right.
what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, that's a dodgy subject, right? Like, would you go back and choose a different adventure? You know?
Yeah, this is that's a whole. Other...
We wouldn't be sitting on this carpet having this podcast, probably. You know? Who knows?
Who knows? So yeah, but with this choose your own adventure in my big backyard, I do think choose your own adventure is kind of like a nice way to look at going on these little adventures around the corner because. You can really do that in your own neighborhood. Like you said, you can just you heard about a nice part of town you've never been to. I mean, Oslo is a nice city, and we haven't been to all the different parts. And, if you put down things sometimes like Google Maps and stuff like that, and you just kind of use your nose a little bit, I mean, you can have a lot of adventures in your own backyard.
I mean, those are the best adventures, right? I think it's a lot of the most memorable travel experiences are when they're the unexpected things, right? It's not like the time when you were in Paris and you went to the Eiffel Tower. You're like, oh, I saw the Eiffel Tower. That's amazing. It's like something iconic that you've seen on TV or in movies, and now I'm standing in front of it. That's crazy. But that's not usually the place where like you meet the random person who then takes you to the crazy party that you didn't even know, or that they're, you get invited to somebody's house for dinner. Those things happen in wherever places, on a bus, in the middle of whatever town. And those are some of the most memorable travel experiences, I think. So it's all about the unexpected adventure, right? Isn't that more than half? I don't want to put a percentage on it, but isn't that one of the main reasons we travel? Is just get out of our comfort zones and to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of interesting because it's kind of, I mean, of course, it's all very subjective at the end of the day. But I mean, especially when thinking about the times that we're moving into now into the future, where maybe traditional, more stereotypical ways of traveling, like taking airplanes, or maybe even, I mean, we're both from United States, land of the good old road trip. And I think we both talked about, great road trips we've been on before in the past and stuff like that. But all of these things, these, technology that we're employing to travel with they're not quite outdated yet, but they might become outdated as things like focusing on sustainability and cleaner travel, greener travel, move into the future. So things like, traveling in your own backyard, and this kind of time in the pandemic where we're at now. I mean, of course, we all hope for the best and hope that this, is as short as a period as possible. But I mean, I don't know about you, but I do kind of hope that like the world of travel, for example, does take some lessons from this time, because it is very much related to also the climate contributions that travel make the climate at this point.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's like, you can't think of the fact that you can't fly, for example, right now. I mean, you could think of it as a limitation, but that's like the Western mindset of like, oh, I need to see more, I need to do more. Maybe it's not about seeing more and doing more. Maybe it's about just having an experience. That's ultimately like probably the biggest thing that travel has taught me pretty recently, or like one of the things that I guess my mind's been more up and up to. I think when I was younger, it was like, it was just such a rush, and you just wanted to go around and like see everything and experience everything. And, that had its place in my life. Now, I mean, I can get the same satisfaction from just showing up in whatever random town and experiencing it, without maybe there is no big site or big museum or whatever. It's more about the people you meet on the street, in the neighborhood, whatever. And then when you start getting to the subject of what you talk about, which is, the interaction and sort of the symbiotic relationship of the land and culture and things like that, it's just another fascinating lens through which to see a place. You know, I just went down to Fredrikstad, which is south of Oslo, and I mean, I felt like I was on a little adventure. You know, it was a place I'd never been. I was there for a weekend, took the train down there. It's only about an hour and 15-minute train ride. They have an old town, beautiful old town. I don't know if you've been there, but it's really a great place and so much history. And you can see how the water that's running through, the river that's running through the town, informed the creation of the town, the life there. You know, there was a fort. There's a very famous like old fort there because it is right along the water. And all of these things play into not just, you know, that fort was built way back when or whatever, but obviously that impacts the whole
design.
Yeah, design of the city, the urban planning, maybe even the mentality, you know, all of that stuff plays in. So when you're in a place and you're looking at it through the lens that you're kind of talking about on this podcast, I think it just opens up another interesting kind of thoughtful way to view a place and to have a travel experience. Right?
Yeah. I mean, when I think about how I first got interested in, you know, studying the outdoors, you know, what does this mean? You know, because a lot of people, when you tell people, oh yeah, I studied outdoor education, or I'm an outdoor educator, and I'm you know, blah blah blah, people immediately associate that with, oh, I'm a guide, or I'm a travel guide, or I'm a kayak instructor, and of course you can do all of these things, but there's something more to that. I mean, anybody can really go take a couple week course and become an instructor of some kind of outdoor activity, you know, or, you know, pay some money, take the course, get the certificate and stuff like that, and you can become a travel guide. Ironically, I also am a travel guide, you know, and we all work in various aspects of this industry, but there is, you know, something more to it when you are like studying the outdoors, or studying like what travel, the nuances of these activities, you know. And what really got me interested in the first place is I can, you know, distinctly remember some moments, and I'm sure you've had these moments, and I'm sure a lot of people on your podcast have talked about these moments. Drum roll, please. Is these moments when you get to that top of the mountain, or you hike out to that lake and you see the mist, you know, rising up in the morning on that, and you take a swim, or you get to that volcanic crater, or maybe you're, I don't know, just sitting in a park in New York with this tree in a very urban setting, and you just take some fresh air and you feel good, and you're like, what is that feeling? You know? And I mean, for me, that's kind of where it all started. It was like, I love going places. I love doing things. I love traveling around. I love being outside. I love hiking and biking and kayaking and all these things. But why? You know?
Right.
But what is that feeling? You know, what is that feeling that we're all getting? And it turns out, I know in my personal experiences, and I read a lot about other people that are, you know, studying and writing about this kind of stuff. And it seems like, you know, those experiences are not necessarily connected to like what we were talking about, you know. Sometimes you want to go get that exciting travel experience, and it's very much marketed that way, and it's very much like advertised that way too, that you have to go long and far, and you have to go visit that, you know, yogi on the top of the mountain somewhere in India or something like that to get that experience. But I think there is, you know, more and more data and literature and people writing about and talking about how, you know, we actually can just find these experiences in our own backyard. And I do feel like these times are calling for it, and then somewhere out of nowhere, maybe a silver lining on all of this kind of pandemic stuff going in the future is the fact that people are focusing a bit more on the local place. You know, it's always buy local, shop local, all this stuff, and now it's like travel local.
Yeah.
So it is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, part of it too, like you mentioned when you were describing the, you know, getting out, just breathing in the air and being, you know, being in a forest or whatever, and just appreciating something. I think taking the time to appreciate it. I think one of the things that travel does for a lot of people, which you can also do at home, is, again, when we talked about creating the box or the framework, you're really just, in some way, maybe you're giving yourself the space, the physical space and the mental space to take time to appreciate things, right? It's like, well, okay, I'm away from home. I'm away from my responsibilities. Now I can relax and look at this rose bush and really understand that, holy crap, these roses are just blooming right now, and this is something they do all the time. And look at these bees eating, you know what I mean? Like all these things that, you know, just being in nature can get you thinking, but also you don't even have to think. You can just be in nature and kind of get a sense of calm. I think we've all experienced that. So it's this idea of just reminding ourselves daily to give ourselves the physical and mental space to appreciate those things just opens up not only just experiences, but I mean, my kids help me a lot with this, right? Like they're a little over 2 and 4.5, and kids notice everything, you know, or like, you know, you take time to show things to them, and it just kind of made me a kid again and made me slow down and kind of like, all right, yeah, let's hang out at this pond and like dig in the dirt for 45 minutes and see what we find. Yeah. Show me this rock. Let me look at this rock. Let me think about, you know, where this rock came from, how long it's been here, you know, all these things. It's just like, you know, so we can, whether you have small kids or not, or you're traveling or not, like the idea of like, oh, I get these breakthroughs, or I get this inspiration when I'm traveling. Yes, it can come from sort of the external forces, but can it also be that you're giving yourself the time and the space to actually be and explore these things and appreciate, you know, like maybe that's a part of it for some people. I know it is for me. So.
Yeah, no, that's a really cool point. I love how you put it. I love how you frame it in this idea of kind of the box that you build for yourself, like how you define, you know. This idea
and it's not like you can't. It's not like you can't get outside of the box, but it's like I think one thing I've learned recently is that in a world of unlimited options, ironically, setting limitations actually gives you more freedom in some ways.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And on another note, I think a lot of people nowadays, especially with like restrictions that are kind of like sweeping the world, are maybe for the first time being forced in a lot of ways to have like lesser expectations or like more, like less freedom in a way. You know, it's because we have to be, you know, staying away from each other and not traveling for long distances on planes and these kinds of things. So it is kind of forcing the mindset in a way, which I'm not sure if it's like the best thing, you know, for people. And I think a lot of people are having trouble with that. But at the same time, it is, you know, kind of making people step back and say like, you know, okay, I can't do that right now. So how am I going to, I still have to live.
Yeah.
So how am I going to live and enjoy myself? And hopefully, yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. You know, choose your own adventure in this little box that we have right now. And maybe the box will get bigger again one day, but nowadays, or maybe the box is going to change. Maybe it's going to turn into a triangular box or something, pentagonal box.
Yeah. But I mean, I think we're going back to being eco-conscious and all that. It's like kind of what you said, right? Like it doesn't, if I was going to summarize all this, it's kind of like we can all sometimes get an idea of what travel is or what anything is in our heads, but it can also be many other things, right? Sometimes you put a label on something and it becomes like, that's what our human minds are made to do, kind of like create sweeping generalizations to like, because there's so much information to process, we can't possibly go into the nuances of everything. So we kind of generalize what a thing is. But if, you know, travel has been to somebody like, it means like, oh, well, it's not really travel or an adventure or like a transnatural experience unless, you know, in some far-flung destination. Well, you know, is that really true? And it's like, well, it's not necessarily, right? Like you don't have to be in a far-flung destination. You don't have to travel fast. You don't have to see a million things. You don't have to go to like, you know, 50 different destinations in 50 days or whatever the thing is. I mean, there are a lot of different ways to kind of be out in the world and take things in and have meaningful experiences without, you know, emitting a lot of greenhouse gases. And again, I'm not like saying don't fly. I mean, like, you know, it would be hypocritical for me to say that, given like the traveling that I've done. But you know, it is a different world now too, and I'm trying to be more conscious of that.
Yeah, it's something that we're all becoming more aware of. You know what I mean? And that I think in many ways the environment itself is like speaking back to the humans and kind of saying,
yo, slow down.
Slow down for your own well-being too. You know what I mean? Like, because we're all connected. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's I think one cool thing you do too that I wanted to highlight before I let you go is another part of what you work on is this kind of digital nomad, independent,
location independence.
Location independence.
Well,
yeah, where
the ability to work from anywhere and sort of have that freedom.
And why this I think is really cool and really important for transcultural experiences and transnatural experiences, because it is, to me, it sounds like helping people become independent of any particular nation or like any particular location helps people get around and travel or be or live in different places across cultures and across natural areas while being able to sustain themselves, and also probably I think in most cases travel at like a slower pace.
Yeah.
I mean, does that?
Yeah. I mean, if you have the ability to work from anywhere, then, whether it's remotely with a company or like we help people sort of start like a business that allows them to be able to work from anywhere, sort of like we call it location independent business, because location freedom was our first value as travelers, but it also gives you time freedom and it can give you financial freedom as well. We call that the triangle of freedom.
Triangle of freedom.
But obviously if you have that ability to kind of earn your income from anywhere, well, that opens up a lot of options, not only for travel, but if you're somebody who, has certain affinity for like the ocean or the mountains. Like for me, I moved to Colorado before I came here. That was like in another lifetime, it seems, because of the lifestyle, to be near the mountains, the camping, the hiking. So in that sense, that's good too, because you can put yourself in a place where you have the things that you love, and then you might not have to travel as much, right? Because you're not traveling for those things. You're there. You live near the beach because you don't have to travel to it now. Because you don't live in the Midwest anymore. You can work from anywhere. So you move to the coast and now you have the beach all the time. And, putting yourself in everybody knows this. I mean, there's certain environments, I think, that just give you energy in some ways, right? I mean, that's why people say well, I love cities. I don't like cities, whatever. That can change, of course. But is that just a preference thing, or is some of it the energy of the place and what it has to offer and what it can give to you as an individual? Like, I don't know. There's a lot of nuances to it. So I think if you have the freedom to work from anywhere, you can travel, of course, but you can also put yourself in a place where you get to be around the things you love, and maybe you don't travel as much. It's your lifestyle to design, and that's one of the things we teach is, like, if you kind of design the lifestyle you want first, then you fit everything in around that, as opposed to what's been the norm, which is, working a job and then trying to fit like all the things that you think are fun, squeeze them into that. Why not just flip it? So that's what we help people do.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty powerful triangle that you're putting into the world. This triangle of freedom. I think it's pretty powerful, and it's pretty integral, I think, as we move on here into the future, especially nowadays. I mean, especially nowadays, I'm just kind of like summarizing. If people want to know more about what Jason does, I'm going to definitely leave all the information about that in the notes, and you can give us the address in a minute. But I think it's pretty powerful that you're helping people kind of get outside the box, get outside their country, get outside wherever, and achieve their goals, and at the same time be able to, go experience those natural places and go experience those different cultures or whatever they want to do. It's no longer contained in an office in one location or one place, and you can transcend cultures, transcend borders, and really just transcend all kinds of business norms, it sounds like.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think it's not just about, like one of the things we're talking about here is this sort of individual satisfaction, right? It's like, well, I get to do these things, I get to be here, I get to do that, so I get to experience this. But I think if people set themselves up for a life that's maybe more fulfilling, if you're somebody that wants to live a more unconventional life than the status quo type of 9-to-5 job thing, then you can do that. And I think out of that, it's not just personal fulfillment and satisfaction in the way that you're intentionally living with your purpose or aligned with your purpose, or maybe just in line with the things that you love, whatever the case is. But I think the impact on that is also on the external world in terms of like, how do I put this? I'm trying to find the right words. So I think what happens is if you're more personally fulfilled, then oftentimes people can also create a greater impact on the world in some ways, right? Like you're enjoying your days, and that means like maybe because you're enjoying your days, even if it's just on a community level, maybe you're more positive. Maybe those interactions lead to other things. You know, maybe you're making just impact on the local people you meet. Maybe it's a bigger impact with your work. I shouldn't say bigger because it's hard to measure these impacts, but you know, maybe you have the time and awareness to be conscious because you're not stressing out about, you know, the day-to-day job stuff. So I just think that, you know, I just kind of wanted to mention that because it's not just about me.
Yeah.
Of course, it's important to be fulfilled, but then also I think that can also lead to a lot of other cool things that aren't me type of things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like a happy me should also make like a happy world.
Yeah, I mean that's what this podcast is all about too, right? It's not just like, yeah, it's about being a good citizen of the world, right? Being a good steward for the planet, and I think we can be that, and then we can also have personal fulfillment and have the experiences we want to. I do think that's possible.
Right on. And as I like to say a lot of times on this podcast and in just life in general, I think it's really important for people to attack from all sides. A lot of these things that we are encountering in life, what's happening to the nature? Oh, there's the climate change. What's happening with this and that? You know, there's all these big, overwhelming kind of existential things happening in life. But we, as the single little people, we can really only do so much.
Yeah.
And we can attack from whatever angle on these big issues. We can try to attack them from our own specific and unique angles.
Yeah.
And I would say, you know, in your case, with your microphone and, you know, your interest in travel and stuff like that.
I'm attacking with my microphone weapon.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you've been able to, from your own particular perspective, kind of aim on these issues from your own particular perspective.
Yeah,
so
but then selfishly, I get to have amazing conversations with people like you, and I love to record these podcasts and things. So it all goes hand in hand, right?
Yeah, having a good time while, you know, trying to make the world better.
Yeah, I mean, I think for most people that does go hand in hand, right? Like trying to make the world a better place is fulfilling, is part of the experience, right? That keeps us going. So that's a good thing.
Right on. Well, Jason, my good old friend, buddy, old pal, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Hey, can you let people know where they can find some of your work if they're interested in to know more about these ideas that you're spreading?
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to podcasts, Zero to Travel, just all spelled out, ZEROTO, travel. And you can find that wherever you find podcasts. That's the easiest place, and you find out everything else. But of course, I have a website, zerototravel.com. If you want to sign up to keep in touch there, you can find out about new episodes and other things that we have going off the podcast. Like I mentioned, anybody is looking to like start some kind of job that, you know, for themselves that allows them to have more freedom. We do that type of stuff and a whole bunch of other stuff. So if you sign up, then you can, for the newsletter, you can find out about that stuff. But regardless, I just hope that you got some value out of the perspectives that we shared today. And hopefully I didn't ramble too much, Josh.
There's a healthy amount of rambling going on because just as we like to go rambling in the forest,
yes,
our feet, we like to ramble on the microphone.
Verbally rambling as well.
But yeah, everybody, so definitely check out Jason's podcast, Zero to Travel. It's really awesome. And thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you.
And that's it, everybody. Thanks again to my good friend Jason Moore for joining the show, and happy birthday to the Zero to Travel podcast. Remember, if you liked what you heard today, you can hear a totally different interview with the same two people over there on Jason's podcast, where he interviews me, and you'll hear a lot more about my bike trip through Norway this past summer, as well as we're going to talk about 5 things that we find most challenging about living abroad. So check out the Zero to Travel podcast. It's really awesome. But
Before I leave you, a few things I want to talk about that I took away from our conversation today. The first might be quite obvious, especially if you know me, if you listen to this podcast. It's this idea when we talk about adventure, especially adventure in your own backyard, or as Jason put it, being a tourist in your own city. So there's many reasons why you might not be able to travel somewhere, and I just don't mean in these times of the pandemic. There's lessons that we bring into this time and lessons that we're going to take from it. But in general, there are infinite constraints and possibilities of constraints in life, some where we have more control over than others. Life is not, like we said, the stereotypical travel magazine cover for most. Whether it be family obligations, financial burdens, disabilities, and other impairments. You could be in a country where there's war, where there's famine. You could be we're all being affected in one way or another by climate change. Who knows what it is and what may impede us into the future. For example, going on easy, day trips to long or idealistic journeys. And maybe it's not something so drastic. Maybe you're just trying to save money or cut down on your carbon footprint. But in many cases, there are still ways that we can all find things in our area, little things to satisfy our curiosity and fascination and kind of energize that travel bug. Like Jason mentioned a few times in our conversation, it's very much about shifting your mindset, setting your own boundaries and expectations. And I know in many cases, we're always encouraged to think outside the box. So I found Jason's perspective one that has been informed by hundreds and hundreds of other travelers. His idea to construct your own box, so to speak, as really something interesting to think about. It seems to me that it has a lot to do with finding happiness and knowing yourself and the environment around you. Your strengths and the environment's strengths, the limitations, and the ability to see beauty in all different kinds of contexts. It's something to think about. I know I still am. Well, that's the Transnational Perspectives for today, everybody. I'd like to hear yours too, so let us know. How do you like to travel and how has this changed over time? Hit me up on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Even you can read our articles on Medium and give us a little clap. Or you can just send us a good old email at transnaturalpod@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, everyone. And until next time, get in touch with nature and get some perspective.